Good morning. Please be standing while Mr. Amit Khurshid Amin says prayers, and then following Reverend Burton.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, all praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds, Gracious, the Merciful, Master of the Day of Judgment. You alone do we worship, and you alone do we implore for help. Guide us in the right path, the path of those on whom you have bestowed your blessings, those who have not incurred displeasure, and those who have not gone astray. Our Lord, bestow on us mercy from yourself and provide for us right guidance in our affair, and ordain for us good in this world as well as in the next. We have turned to you with repentance. O my Lord, a beggar I am of whatever good you bestow upon me. My Lord, enable me to be grateful for your favor which you have bestowed upon me and upon my parents, and to do such good works as would please you, and admit me by your mercy among your righteous servants. O my Lord, make my entry a good entry, and then make me come forth with a good forthcoming, and grant me from yourself a helping power. Amen.
Heavenly Father, in your word you have given us a vision of that holy city, to which the nations of the world bring their glory. Behold and visit, we pray, the city of Salford. Renew the ties of mutual regard which form our civic life. Bless our leaders and inspire them to work always for the common good. Enable us to eliminate poverty, prejudice and oppression, that peace may prevail with righteousness and justice with order, that men and women from different cultures and with differing talents may find with one another the fulfillment of their humanity. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Please remain standing. Councillor Saunders wishes to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, before I know in silence for the sad victims of the fire, I'd just like to mention, I mentioned last month at the forum, some of the wonderful businesses that have started in Salford and grown nationally. And one such business is Nyman's, who many of you will know sponsor the signs that say "Welcome to Salford," sponsored by Nyman. Sadly, last Friday, the founder and CEO of Nyman's, Julian Nyman, passed away suddenly from a heart attack, aged 64. I'm literally going from this meeting to conduct his funeral at Rainsford Cemetery via Nyman's factory, where all the staff are going to pay their respect. Julian built up this company from nothing, despite many, many difficulties, including some serious health issues. And I think he was a great inspiration to all people in Salford.
We shall remain standing in reverence of the Pearson family, who tragically had a terrible accident. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated.
Shall we put a bit further forward?
Yeah, please, yeah. Right. That's it. Right. I have not been notified of any announcements or special business. Do we have any apologies for today's council meeting? Thank you. No further apologies. Thank you. Do any members have any personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interest that they need to declare at this meeting? Can I ask members with interest to now declare them? Minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November 2017 are the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of November approved as a correct record. So you move them. Thank you. Do you have any petitions that need to be received? Item 6, Langworthy by-election. The returning officer is asked to present the results of the Langworthy by-election held on the 14th of December 2017, after which I will permit members to ask questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. That's myself. The report is there in front of you. I just ask you to note the report and offer our congratulations to Councillor Karun Ziza, newly elected member for the Langworthy ward.
At this point, I'd like to welcome the councillor at this meeting. Amendments to membership of the Cabinet committees, panels and outside bodies. City Mayor is asked to present amendments to membership of the Cabinet committees and outside bodies, after which we'll permit members to ask questions.
Happy to just move the report and take any questions.
Councillor asks to note the amendments as outlined in the report. Statement to the elected City Mayor. The City Mayor is asked to present his statement to Council.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think, first of all, I'd like to put on record that, my thoughts and prayers at this time are also with the Pearson family and the friends of that family for the tragic loss of life and the injuries that have been incurred from the house fire. I'd also like to put on record my thanks and sincere appreciation to the community in Walkden and that part of the city for the support and the solidarity that they've shown over recent weeks. It's been absolutely phenomenal. And I know various councillors of this chamber have also been involved in that work, so thank you from the bottom of my heart, really. I'd also like to welcome Wilson Nkurunziza to Salford's Council chamber, and delighted to obviously see you, and also delighted to see this council making real progress on equality issues and BAME representation within this council chamber. I think that's a testimony to the hard work of this City Council, the equality strategy and the work we've been doing over many, many years. Welcome to Salford City Council, Wilson. So, good morning to all of you, and obviously welcome to our first council of 2018. 2017 has been a challenging year for many of us, and as this is the first full council of the new year, it's certainly encouraged a degree of reflection on my part. In Britain, we saw terrorist attacks in both London and Manchester. In Manchester, we shockingly witnessed the aftermath of a suicide bomber targeting the largely teenager fan base of the artist Ariana Grande at a concert in the city centre, taking 22 lives and leaving around 120 people injured. Certainly my thoughts, and I'm sure the thoughts of this council chamber and prayers continue to be with the friends and families of those who have lost loved ones and those who have suffered injuries. However, despite these acts and these despicable acts in many respects, they failed in many respects in their intent to divide people and communities of this country. In Manchester, we were witness to countless selfless acts of members of the public, taxi drivers and our public services outside the Ariana Grande concert as they pulled together, showing solidarity in taking care of the victims and those attending the concert on the 22nd of May 2017. We saw survivors housed by members of the public, taxis queuing to give free rides, and firemen and police officers braving the site of the bombing to help retrieve the injured. And what was a terrible, tragic affair that could have been little more life-affirming action than seeing the bravery of those individuals faced with such suffering. The whole world looked to Manchester with admiration in terms of how we approach this in the weeks following the attacks, and I would like to salute all the survivors, the volunteers and all members of the emergency services crew who were present on that fateful night. We also saw the tragedy of Grenfell, in which 71 people, many of them children, lost their lives due to the fire safety of the building being compromised by an unsafe cladding system. The fallout from this horrific tragedy is still yet to be determined from the Grenfell Tower inquiry chaired by Sir Martin Morbick and the independent review of building regulations and fire safety led by Dame Judith Hackett. Within Greater Manchester, I've been tasked to chair the Greater Manchester High Rise Task Force, fully participating both with the inquiry and the review, whilst formulating a response, working with the Fire and Rescue Service, housing providers from all the 10 districts and other partners on how best to ensure the safety of all our residents living in high-rise tower blocks across Greater Manchester. In the City of Salford, we were able to announce agreement from full council to borrow up to 25 million in August 2017 for the immediate replacement and reinstallation of safe cladding. And I'm pleased to say that following extensive negotiations with contractors, work has begun to make every resident of Salford's tower blocks safe. And I'd also like to put on record my thanks to members of the council and ward councillors for their support and cooperation in allowing members of the mayoral team, especially Councillor Merry, and officers of this city council to move as quick as possible to ensure the safety of our residents. The safety of our residents, as we all know in this chamber, has always been our primary concern. I'm still in discussions with the newly named Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government over financial liability for what appears to be an industrial failure of cladding systems nationally. And I still firmly hold the opinion that it was a failure in the national building regulations and associated legislation and practices which allowed these materials to make it to the UK marketplace in the first instance. The people of Salford should not have to bear the burden, the replacement of these materials, paying for the mistakes of consecutive governments who hollowed out, decentralised and privatised regulatory processes, contributing to the environment in which aluminium composite material was able to be used widely across the country. This should not be the cost that the people of Salford are forced to pay. And on the 8th of June 2017, we also had a snap general election. Many pollsters predicted significant losses for Labour, with many Labour activists also wavering in their optimism. But the snap general election was a gamble which Prime Minister Theresa May was clearly willing to take. But what happened instead was remarkable and unprecedented in British politics. Within the space of 3 weeks of campaigning, Labour gained over 20 points in the approval ratings up and down the country, slashing the Tory majority to 12 and quickly overtaking them thereafter. Personally, I believe if the election had lasted another week longer, we would actually have a Labour government right now. And it stands Theresa May and the Tories teeter on a wafer-thin majority, bolstered by paid-for opportunistic support from the DUP. But the public debate, in my opinion, has significantly shifted. The pro-austerity, neoliberal orthodoxy, which has been current in British politics for decades, has been shifted, and politicians are facing increased demands for intervention, whether that's on housing, transport, railways, even the industrial strategy, or indeed construction. This is a shift made all the more significant in the wake of the collapse of Carillion, one of our country's most significant construction and private finance initiative partners, employing 20,000 people in the UK, holding 450 contracts with the UK government, with 30,000 small firms in their supply chain, engaged in strategic infrastructure projects the length and breadth of our country. Putting aside the government's clear disregard for procedure in continuing to sign contracts with a company repeatedly issuing profit warnings, the collapse of Carillion is emblematic of so many issues within modern Britain and government policy. There is a colossal wastefulness of many PFI contracts, driven now only by an ideological belief that the free market must be involved in every area of life, regardless of associated transaction costs, evidence, or consequences. This is often bolstered by a shocking culture of grotesque executive pay and bonuses, with workers uncertain about their futures asked to keep working through the liquidation of the company, whilst bosses take home huge paychecks of hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. And there are often revolving doors between politics and the executives of key strategic companies in the United Kingdom, continually being awarded contracts that they fail to fulfil, taking all the profits while the public bears the risk. With cost estimates at Hinkley Point skyrocketing to over 50 billion and HS2 estimated to be 56 billion, surely the collapse of Carillion marks the end of rampant contractualism and the dogma of private sector efficiency that for too long has characterised public sector infrastructure projects. But with the government's current track record, can we really expect them to actually learn any lessons here? The government stands on a record of failure across many policy areas. They've failed to lessen the national debt, now at staggering 88% of gross domestic product. They've failed to deliver an economic recovery, with growth lagging behind all other European nations bar Greece. They failed to create a high-pay economy with record numbers of our citizens suffering in-work poverty, teachers applying for emergency funding for transport, children attending schools without breakfast, and nurses using food banks. They have failed to fix our NHS, thrown into crisis by a top-down reorganisation that they promised wouldn't happen, and a malicious privatisation agenda, leading to the biggest winter crisis in living memory. And they've failed to tackle the housing crisis, with big developers building luxury apartments for sale to foreign investors, whilst British residents can't afford to rent, let alone get on the property ladder. And now, in partial recognition of their failures, the government have actually supported Labour's own reforms to mitigate the damage they have caused, recently backing Karen Buck MP's Homes Fit for Human Habitation and Liability for Housing Standards Bill through Parliament, calling for more accountability from landlords on housing standards in light of nearly 3 million people living in substandard accommodation. Thankfully, the collapse of Carillion hasn't had a direct impact upon any major infrastructure projects that the City of Salford are currently involved in. But the wider ramifications for the construction industry and the economy are of grave concern. These developments are especially worrying in the context of further austerity and cuts to local government budgets. With cuts to Salford's revenue support grant and rising budget pressures in children's services and adult social care, we are forced to find almost another £12 million from our budget this next coming financial year. But it gets worse. With government reforms to the benefits system, over 4,000 people in Salford are currently affected by the introduction of universal credit. Our housing providers report a huge impact on their tenants as a result of the change, with City West reporting as many as 91.3% of universal credit tenants in arrears. This compares with 42.3% of those not on universal credit also in arrears. Furthermore, whilst the average for arrears amongst non-universal credit tenants is £472, for those on universal credit it's £852. These trends are mirrored across our providers, with clear correlation between the introduction of universal credit and increased use of collection orders. Once again, the local authority in our dwindling discretionary support allowance is left to pick up the tab. All of this in a context of disappointing results from the local government settlement. The 2007 announcements took money from us in the form of new homes bonus again, giving back nothing in return other than the ability to add an extra 1% to our council tax bills, continuing to force us to tax people locally to pay for public services. 1% raises only £900,000, nothing in relation to the budget pressures we face in children's services and adult social care. Furthermore, it places the burden of costs often on those who can least afford it. Council tax, as we all know in this council chamber, is a regressive form of taxation. And meanwhile, central government employment, as I highlighted in the last council, was up by 28,000 on the previous quarter at 3.021 million, the highest comparable records since records began in 1999. But despite these hardships, we've already seen successes in Salford. Our investment in New Bailey is already paying off, and we are rapidly filling the office spaces there. The project will bring millions back into our coffers each and every year, a vital subsidy for our starved services and resources in the City Council. Chapel Street is booming, and Salford is rapidly becoming a go-to place for exciting, creative, artistic businesses. In November, we launched our report Escape Velocity with Res Publica. The report, cited nationally by the press and industry experts, heralded the development of the quays as an exemplary example of place-based investment and as a site for further development as a strategic economic asset within the United Kingdom. The paper also recommended Media City UK as a prime site for the relocation of Channel 4, should the government pursue its plans to move the broadcaster outside of London. Media City itself continues to grow and expand, the second largest digital cluster in the UK and the fastest growing site for digital startups with over 7,000 jobs. And last week we saw the launch of My City Salford, and the digital inclusion strategy was the first of its kind in the United Kingdom. Though the scheme will connect those left behind by the pace of change in new technology, connecting them to the benefits of the digital age, feeding into our expansion of library provision within the city, we will be investing a further £100,000 in new IT systems, bringing internet access to all areas of the city. Internet access is increasingly important, and as councillors in Salford, the 22nd most deprived local authority in the country, many of you will be aware of the struggles faced by residents who have difficulty accessing technology and the internet. It's vitally important that with the gains of Media City UK and our increasing prominence as a centre for digital technology, that the residents of Salford gain from the growth we have seen. And the launch itself gained national recognition, and that's a real credit to all our staff who have worked tirelessly and so hard on making this happen. I embrace 2018 as a year which will no doubt contain new problems, but also a year filled with possibility for our city. Our task in Salford is to ensure that the growth, the development and the profile of our city benefits the residents that live here, to bring the council and our work closer to the people we all seek to serve and represent. And I'm confident that we can continue to build on the good work we have started, and I look forward to working with you all for a better and fairer Salford. Thank you.
Notice of motion, policing events. The proposer, sorry, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. It's very nice to see you up in that chair there, controlling things. Before you go on to the motion, I'm going to raise a point of order on the motion. It is our belief that matters regarding motions should be relevant to the Council's business and beyond matters which affect the interests of the city or its residents. It is our opinion that this one does not. 15 bullet point 4 is the required rule on the Constitution, which I have to quote under the Constitution, but we will not be taking any part in the proceedings, so the group must talk amongst themselves, but we will listen.
Make a point of order if you want.
Make a point of order.
If you make, yes.
This puts you in a very difficult position, but I am very disappointed that the people of Worsley and Booth Tower, many of which are minors, will not have a voice in this chamber as a result of the decision of the Conservative group. Is it in order for people who have already been told that this is particularly relevant to Salford because of the number of miners who are actually affected by the miners' dispute and for potential issues relating to the policing of the thing, is it in order for them to ignore the wishes of their constituents and to take no part in a legitimate debate?
At this point, Veronica Carruthers.
Thank you for your guidance. There is no mention in that motion that way. So, you know, it's not the people of Worsley, Brewster. They may well have miners there.
Would you take point of information?
Well, I don't think we should drag this on any longer, John.
Let's just start.
Well, no, you clearly don't want to listen, but I'm information.
We need to start.
There is no specific mention. You were actually given assurances which seemed to satisfy you at the time. I don't know if you've been turned over by the rest of your group, but the fact is that those assurances seemed to satisfy you at the time that this was particularly relevant to the people of Salford.
Yeah, go on. Amanda Carruthers will actually give a statement.
Chair, Section 15(4) of the relevant part of the Constitution says that motions must either be about matters which affect the Council or the interests of the city or its residents. It's correct that that was discussed at the agenda setting group, and the proposer of the motion indicated that there would be information in the proposal which confirmed that this was of relevance to the city of Salford. In those circumstances, there's not sufficient at this stage to rule the motion outside the Constitution.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now start with the proposer of the motion, Councillor John Warmsham. He's asked to move the motion, and Councillor David Lancaster to second the motion, after which I'll permit members to ask questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. At the end of October 2016, the Home Secretary ruled out an inquiry into the brutal events of the Battle of Orgrave during the miners' strike. To say that this is a disappointment to those former mining communities and all those who support the Orgrave Truth and Justice campaign, including miners from Salford, is an understatement. Some of us in this chamber can remember the detrimental effect that the strike had on the mining community here in Salford. Indeed, we should never forget the long history Salford, in particular Worsley, Boothtown, Pendlebury and Swinton, to mention a few, has had with the mining industry. Can I also remind members of this council, the Orgrave campaign is strictly non-political and welcomes support from all those with genuine concern, particularly around the deception and covering up of events that happened at Orgrave that day. I think all of us have seen footage of the events and know something was very, very seriously wrong. 95 miners who took part in a peaceful picket were arrested and charged with riot offences. Later, all acquitted among claims that the police had fabricated evidence. There were also claims that police attacked the peaceful protesters. Miners suffered this just for exercising their right to protest against the threat to their jobs, their industry and their communities. The report of the Independent Police Complaints Commission, released in June 2015, found evidence of excessive violence by police officers, a false narrative from police exaggerating violence by miners, perjury by officers giving evidence to prosecute the arrested men, and an apparent cover-up of that perjury by senior officers. In the light of these statements, it is very, very surprising indeed that the Home Secretary does not think there are lessons to be learned from any review of these events. Let us think about those miners, their wives and their families, who suffered so much at that time, and all that has been left of their reputation as the years have gone by. This council is therefore asking to support the actions taken by West Lancashire Borough Council by joining with them in 1, expressing disappointment at the Home Secretary's decision, 2, observing that the Independent Police Complaints Commission, in their redacted report released in June 2015, said there was evidence of excessive violence by police officers and a false narrative from police exaggerating violence by miners, perjury by officers giving evidence to prosecute the arrested men, and an apparent cover-up of that perjury by senior officers. 3, noting that 95 miners were arrested and charged with riot offences, but were all later acquitted amid claims that police at the time had fabricated evidence. 4, agreeing in the light of such statements, the Home Secretary needs to review her decision that there should be no inquiry into such events. And finally, item 5, requesting that the City Mayor, local MPs, namely Barbara Keeley, Rebecca Long-Bailey and Graham Stringer, all write to the Home Secretary and ask that she takes into account the opinion of this council and accepts there is widespread public concern about events at Orgreave and calls for her to reverse her original decision and to now order an inquiry into them. I would hope, Chair, that everybody in this council would support this notice of motion. As Salford Council, we have a strong tradition on supporting human rights, local democracy and the right of law. And I would ask again that everybody would support this because it is a travesty and the truth should come out. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor David Lancaster.
A minute ago. When this request came in from West Lancs, I was very keen to make sure that it was of non-political nature, the resolution. Because why I wanted this decision coming to this council is because I think we've a responsibility for the policing of this country and Salford. We've also got a responsibility to make sure the judicial system of this country works effectively. To me, those are two important aspects of life, of politics, that whatever our views are politically, we must make sure the rule of the law arises and works and effective and the judicial system is effective. I think it's questionable why the Home Secretary didn't want to see an inquiry into this. I didn't make that comment. I'm not making that comment. I'm making the comment that she ought to, on the evidence which is there now, that there needs to be an inquiry into the evidence which has been given. If there's nothing to hide, why do you not want to actually review that decision? To me, reviewing the decision is quite important. We've built a good reputation in this city of policing. It puts into question the effectiveness of that system of policing when the evidence is given to it that police failed in certain tasks. You would think any Home Secretary would want to have that investigated to make sure that that wasn't the case. And that to me is astounding, quite frankly, that should happen. I could be very passionate about this. I remember the miners' strike quite well, but I'm keeping away from the miners' strike itself and looking at the judicial system we've got. So to me, hiding behind this resolution, parking it for the next 30 years, is not a way to operate. Clearly we've got a responsibility to our citizens to make sure where evidence is shown that policing has been ineffective and that it needs to be investigated, then that needs to be investigated. And where there's an opportunity to need to look at a judicial review of anything, that judicial review should take place as well. For those are the two main reasons, I believe, because I think the credibility in Salford of the police is excellent. And we don't want it undermining, quite frankly, by this effectiveness of policing question mark about their reliability. So that's why I'm asking you to support the resolution.
Yes, Councillor Bellines.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just like Councillor Lancaster, I could get very emotional. In fact, the first speech I made in this council was in 1984 on the miners' strike. But like Councillor Lancaster, this motion isn't about the miners' strike, the rights and wrong of it. It is about what I consider democracy and openness. And here we have an Home Secretary and a government that has said that this will be reported in 2050. Now, does that mean they know already what the results of that would be? I would say yes, they do. And they don't want to tell the British public about what that is. And we've seen too often, we've seen it through the Hillsborough issue, with the police involvement in South Yorkshire and the countrywide, the way the police operated at that time. It is absolutely crucial that all the evidence is shown to the British people about what's going on in this so-called democracy of ours. This is what we should be arguing for, and it isn't party political in that sense. I'm sure the opposition would be wanting to see truth and justice come forward. So why they're sitting on the backsides now and don't want to comment on this is absolutely disgraceful. And to hang it on the fact that Salford hasn't been named in the motion is absolutely ridiculous. There were many people in Salford in the miners' strike. I can remember Agecroft and people there on strike asking the same questions that we're now asking today. What went on at Orgreave? The way that the BBC showed the programme and I alleged that the picket started it when we all know, everybody knows, that it was the police that charged them. We know that. That's no secret. We know that. But there's a lot of other things we don't know that need to be examined and shown fully, clearly, to make sure that justice is done. And to wait till 2050, when 90, maybe 100% of the miners at that time will be dead. It's absolutely disgraceful. And I welcome Councillor Warmisham's motion, seconded by David Lancaster, because it's about time that things like this are open. You know, we argue that we're a country that believes in justice and democracy, but when a big issue like this turns around, we shove it and kick it into the long grass. It's absolutely disgraceful. And the more that councillors like this move motions like this and pressurise the Home Secretary to come forward with the truth, justice may be done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Jolly.
Yeah, I think I'm on. Yeah, like many people in this room, I went through the miners' strike in '83. When the issue was raised about whether it was pertinent to Salford, I went through my drawers last night trying to find, I didn't find them unfortunately, because if I had I would have worn them, my two badges I had at the time, the Lancashire Miners on Strike and the Agecroft Miners on Strike badge. Should also be remembered that our MP at the time, Stan Orme, was the Labour spokesman on energy and therefore was the shadow of the Energy Secretary and was basically Neil Kinnock's representative in this dispute from the Labour Party. So there is that connection. There are miners here. It's a mining area. Boothstown was traditionally a mining area. Agecroft obviously a mining area. And therefore many miners are alive. And it is of interest and concern of them what happened, even though it is over in Yorkshire, because there's a thing that we talk about in the Labour Party called solidarity. Another thing I have to say about Stan as well, it was interesting, I spent quite a lot of time with Stan in 1985, and he was in contact with Peter Walker, the Secretary of State for Energy, to try and find some wriggle room for negotiations. And it became clear there was none. Not because of Peter Walker, but because of higher up the chain, and that there was not going to be a negotiated settlement. But the issue here is about the policing of the strike. It fits into South Yorkshire. The South Yorkshire Police, we saw it at Hillsborough, that there are huge concerns about the conduct of the South Yorkshire Police during that period and their relationship with the government as well over this strike. Now, we heard stories and we heard them at the time. Large numbers of police were brought up from the south of England on overtime and barracked in South Yorkshire to police the strike. There are huge concerns about what happened there. There are local coppers in South Yorkshire who were distraught because decades of community relations were destroyed by what happened there. And then, of course, another one, I don't know if it's a true story, but it does fit in, that I heard a story of a group of young men who were travelling from Lancashire over to the East Coast on a fishing trip. They had to go through South Yorkshire, but they didn't. This is the United Kingdom, and citizens of this country were turned back from South Yorkshire by the police because they were of an age that they might be striking minors. So they were turned back and denied free access to part of their own country because of what the policing that was going on in that area. And that, of course, brings us to Orgreave, which fits in with Hillsborough. It fits in with the way that the South Yorkshire police behaved at that time. Is it like Hillsborough? Was there perjury? Was there fabrication of evidence? Were there lies from the police? Well, actually, there may well have been. There is some indication of that. But to find out what that means for policing of this country in the future, not just in the past, we need an inquiry to get to the bottom of it, and that's why we should support this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Lewis.
Going to say, so I shall keep it short. But it's quite interesting that the opposition here are not supporting this motion, because I think we may have had a slightly different situation had it been 2015 where Theresa May was the Home Secretary, because there is not much I would compliment Theresa May for, but she did actually support the Hillsborough inquiry. And at that time, it sounded like she may potentially support an Orgreave inquiry as well. She said at the time, we must never underestimate how the poison of decades-old misdeeds seep down through the years and is just as toxic today as it was then. That is why difficult truths, however unpalatable they may be, must be confronted head-on. I can completely concur with that. There is this link between Hillsborough and Orgreave. At Hillsborough, the inquiry identified what the police had done, but it didn't really understand and identify why the police behaved like that. And in order to understand why the police behaved like that, you have to look at the years before and the way the South Yorkshire police behaved years before. It was only 5 years before that Orgreave happened. The police at that time, they have been described as being hardened, high-handed and detached from citizens. So unless we understand what happened at Orgreave, you cannot fully understand what happened at Hillsborough. Our public bodies they need to be accountable and they must be transparent. The police must be, but also those who oversee the way they behave and how the government needs to be able to be accountable and transparent in their evaluation of how the police behave. And therefore, I'm fully supporting this motion, because those, not only do the people and the miners of Orgreave and their families deserve justice, it also reflects on giving full justice to those at Hillsborough. Thank you. I support the motion.
Councillor Bolkind.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Manchester and Salford has a tremendous history of, shall we say, elections, democracy. And we have, in the ward where I live, Kersal is where the Chartists met. We have in Manchester the Free Trade Hall, which remembers the Peterloo massacre. And these are all parts of our history, and we can read about them and learn about them. Orgreave, if you read, and I don't know whether it's yet down in history, because it's not that, I don't know when you actually declare history, is it on the day or when it happens? But I was actually living overseas at the time. And there is no doubt when I was watching it on television that there is a lot to answer and a lot that hasn't been said. I think people overseas know more about this sometimes than actually know it now. This is not a political thing. This is a thing that respects our freedoms. I mean, it's a very important year, 2018. It's 100 years since the women got the vote in this country. And if you go near the Manchester hospital, you'll see commemoration plaques of women fighting for their rights. The miners were fighting for their rights in those days, and the legislation allowed them to travel around the country. And I'm sure many went from Salford. And on that basis, I think that we have an obligation here to support this motion fully.
Thank you. Councillor Murray. So, yeah, the next on the list. Yeah. Councillor Murray.
Thank you. Right. Thank you, Chairman. I'm acutely aware, looking at the serried ranks of the Tories standing in defence of our human rights in this country, of a saying that is, for tyranny to succeed in this country, all that is necessary is for good men and women to stand and say nothing. And I'm incredibly disappointed as somebody who believes in the rule of law and who noted the non-political aspect of this motion, as Councillor Lancaster pointed out, that we are not in a position, apparently, where the Conservative Party feels able to actually support a motion which is about people's fundamental human rights. I felt passionately about the miners' strike as well. I thought it was a tragedy forced upon it by the actions of Mrs. Thatcher, but that's not what the motion is about. The motion is about a police force that exceeded their powers in a systematic way, that abused the law, that actually ignored the rule of law with the encouragement of the executive at that moment in time. And we need to establish the facts to establish how that happened and why that happened. The fact that all those cases were acquitted would be a national scandal, in other circumstances. And I feel passionately, as somebody who, as I say, believes that it is the duty of people to obey the law, that this is something that has brought the law into disrepute. And the reality of the situation is that once we go down the slippery slope, whether it's a Labour government or a Conservative government, of saying it's all right for the executive to ignore the law, it's all right for the executive to use the powers of the police to force a particular position on the country, then we are moving into a situation of tyranny and moving away from a democracy. And Councillor Hines was quite right to say that. So I would appeal to the Conservative Party. Right, you've not, I'm afraid, got a perfect record on defending human rights in this country. You've not got a good record on defending free speech, where it goes against the interests of your own party. Only last night, we saw them vote down the European Charter on Fundamental Human Rights, ignoring that particular piece of legislation because they didn't want the executive to be fettered. All of that is going on at the moment. And I would appeal to them, at least for once, stand by your conscience, stand by your belief in democracy, and vote in favour of a motion that simply asks for an inquiry into what everybody now agrees was an overwhelming use by the executive of the police to force their particular view on the country. Actually stand up for that for a change and not sit silent as though this is an important issue about defending the interests of your party. Speak for the country, not for a party.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson.
Right, thank you, Chair. I think when an inquiry is denied, it raises the question, rightly or wrongly, what are they trying to hide? I don't know. But I think we need to think back. I don't think this is just about Orgrave. We're going back 34 years. Councillor Jolly says some of us remember it, but there are also other people in this room who weren't even born at that time and didn't know what it was like to live in Britain in 1984, or to live in Salford in 1984. We've already heard reference to Orgrave and South Yorkshire and Hillsborough. For those of you that were around, let me remind you what it was like in Manchester. We'd also got a miners' strike here as well. And we had a chief constable. We actually had a Greater Manchester Council as well that had a police committee. It was a Salford councillor and Greater Manchester Council who chaired that, Peter Kelly. And we had a chief constable, James Anderson, who completely ignored the police committee. He had the name God's cop because he operated not in line with carrying out the law, but actually wanting to make the law rather than carry it out. He decided what was right and what was wrong. And some of the ways that he operated were absolutely appalling. I'm not going to go into it all today. But I think that what this is about is really raising the question about how the police operate and the relationship between the police and government as well, because I think this is some of the things that will start to come out if an inquiry is held. And I think it's important. It may be embarrassing for some people what comes out, but I think it's really, really important that we learn from the past, that we don't make the same mistakes again today. I support the motion.
Thank you. There are no further questions or comments. We will move to the vote.
No, John Councillor Womersham needs to finish as the proposer.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Can I thank colleagues for their support and the input they've had on this debate, and I concur with everything that they've said. I am disappointed with my Conservative colleagues that you can't stand up for what is a real human rights issue. As I said in my outline, is Salford Council have got a proud tradition of supporting human rights, local democracy and the rule of law. And that's what this is. It's not political. As Councillor Lancaster said, it's about getting to the truth. Do we really want to live in a democracy where the judiciary is a joke and police can do what they want? That's unacceptable. As David said, in Salford we're very, very lucky that our relationship with our police force is second to none. And, you know, I think things have massively changed since the 80s, as Councillor Ferguson said. It was a horrible time. It really was under that certain Chief Constable. But I would make a plea to our Conservative colleagues, change your mind and vote for this motion, which is about human rights.
It's been moved and named vote. Agreed?
I've seen that there are some people in the chamber who gave apologies at the beginning, so I'm going to read out the names of all members. City Mayor Dennett.
For the motion.
Councillor Antrobus.
For.
Councillor Balkind.
For.
Councillor Barnes. Councillor Bellamy. Councillor Bentham. Councillor Boshall. Councillor Brocklehurst. Councillor Birch. Councillor Clark. Councillor Clarkson. Councillor Cohen. Councillor Collinson. Councillor Compton. Councillor Peter Connor. Councillor Critchley. Councillor Dawson. Councillor Dobbs. Councillor Ferguson. Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Karen Garrido. Councillor Robin Garrido. Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Hesling. Councillor Hines. Councillor Hudson. Councillor Humphreys. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Jolly. Councillor Jones. Councillor Kelly. Councillor King. Councillor Lancaster. Councillor Lee. Councillor Lewis. Councillor Lindley. Councillor McIntyre. Councillor Masheter. Councillor Merry. Councillor Morris. Councillor Mullen. Councillor Kuranziza. Councillor Ord. Councillor Pevitt. Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Gina Reynolds. Councillor Neil Reynolds. Councillor Ryan. Councillor Saunders. Councillor Sharp. Councillor Stone. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Turner. Councillor Walsh. Councillor Warmisham. Councillor Warner. Councillor Watkin. Councillor Weir. Councillor Michael Wheeler. Councillor Peter Wheeler. Councillor Paul Wilson. I'm going to give you a vote. Councillor Ronnie Wilson.
No vote. No vote.
Motion's carried.
The motion has been carried. Next is item 10, general questions or comments to elected city mayor. There's been no questions, written questions, therefore members.
Councillor Howard Bolkind has a question.
Councillor Howard Bolkind has a question.
Verbal notice to the City Mayor regarding the Swinton sewage works planning application from Bellway Homes. I have been asked by that committee to ask you specifically whether you have had any personal discussions with Bellway Homes, as they have said, and I'm the piggy in the middle here, possibly sitting on the naughty chair, not from me, City Mayor, as you're well aware, to ask you whether you've had any personal dealings with Bellway Homes regarding the Swinton South sewage works.
So, in connection with the Swinton Sewage Works proposals for development and Bellway's Homes, I can confirm to this council I have not met with Bellway's Homes and I have not had any dealings with them in connection with this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jeannie Reynolds.
I just want to thank the City Mayor for referencing the crisis in the NHS. I'm sick to the back teeth of the Tory mantra that they're putting record amounts of money being poured into the NHS. The reality is that spending in the NHS is growing at the lowest rate since records began in 1955. We've got the lowest percentage of GDP spent on healthcare in the whole of Europe. We've got the lowest number of beds per capita in Europe. We all know from the news, from social media, from what we're hearing, that millions are suffering the longest waits in the history of the NHS for A&E care, for beds, for cancer treatments, and that operations are now being cancelled. How on earth is the NHS safe in the hands of the Tories? And I'd just like to thank our workforce here in Salford, right across the healthcare and the social care sector, for doing such a brilliant job under immense pressure. And I would like to thank them for all the work they've put in, especially during this time with the winter pressures, which is an added stress.
Councillor Robin Guido.
The first, in fact, briefly, the Mayor mentioned dogma of private sector. And I think I'd remind you what about the dogma of nationalisation, which we're now seeing coming from the lips of your leader. Just as bad, and if one thinks back toward the nationalised industries that we had in this country and the state that they were in, that in fact I, for one, certainly do not want to go back to that. NHS is a difficult one, and you did mention it, Mr Mayor, and I don't think you'll find anybody in this council chamber who disagrees on the importance and benefit of the NHS. We have, and I say we, the country, the government, has put more and more money into the NHS. Unfortunately, it's still not enough. And I think there will have to come a time when we decide how best we can continue to provide the service which we must provide for those in need. I don't think it's a simple solution. You mentioned, Mr Mayor, about the building of luxury housing apartments in the country instead of housing for those in need. Well, I'm afraid, Mr Mayor, we've got to look at our own doorstep. We have approved hundreds and hundreds, in fact thousands, I think probably now, of luxury apartments in the city of Salford. And I, for one, have questioned this on a number of occasions. We're also approving hundreds of houses recently, last year, 2017, for 3 and 4 bedroom luxury houses, not social housing. And therefore, I think we have to look on our own doorstep, Mr Mayor, and decide how best we're going to actually deal with this problem. We are not providing the houses which people actually need, and I think it's a sad reflection. I think you really need to take a hard, long look at this yourself. Can I just come back very briefly? You did mention about City West 90% in arrears because of universal credit. But I think, Mr Mayor, anybody can take figures out of context and misquote. What I think you have to bear in mind, in fact, is that the figures have been artificially inflated because of the 7-day wait before the universal credit kicked in. If you actually remove that, as it will be removed in February, then in fact the figures are probably complete reverse of that. And in fact, in terms of arrears in the City of Salford from City West, collection continues to improve. Performance is at a very high level, and in fact, certainly nowhere near the 91%. In fact, I'd say you could probably reverse that 91% quite easily.
I understand, unless it's changed, that Councillor Garrido is on the board of Faviva Housing, which is the parent company of City West. Would it not be appropriate that he declares an interest when he makes statements about City West to the Council?
It's a matter for Councillor Garrido to decide.
But I'm informed that is...
I'll answer it.
Yes, please.
It is, of course, a matter for individual members to decide if they have an interest, but if there is a remuneration paid and it's something that people are speaking on, then serious consideration should be given to whether there is an interest declared.
Councillor Hines. Councillor Hines.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, I don't agree with Councillor Robbie Garrido on public ownership. For example, I grew up, and most of my life was when we had decent public ownership, when we didn't have a crisis on the railways, when we didn't have a crisis in the utilities. All of them have gone worse as far as I'm concerned. Of course, things have progressed, but who's to say they wouldn't have progressed under public ownership? And it would have been a much fairer system, understanding system that we had at that time. But the dogma of a well-known infamous lady was determined, of course, to see public ownership once and for all. And when Councillor Garrido talks about public ownership, I'm not talking, and we're not talking about public ownership where you nationalise the local chippy or the local hairdresser or the local plumber. We're talking about the big parts of this country that perhaps if we'd have had public ownership, as we did many years ago, maybe we'd have been a much better position to fight the crisis that we had in 2008. In fact, we may not have even had the crisis of 2008. But getting back to Councillor Gina Reynolds' issue of the NHS, remember when David Cameron won in 2010, it was going to be safe in their hands. They were going to put more money in. Well, obviously, with a growing population and an elderly population and the demands because of new technology that comes into the health service, there's got to be more money in it. But, and Councillor Garrido quite rightly said, perhaps there is not enough money in it. But at the minute they started off wrong, didn't they? They started off wrong, the Conservative government and Liberal government of 2010, when they started to bring reforms in that cost billions of pounds to start with, that put the NHS and workers within the NHS on the back foot. And we see that crisis day in, day out. And workers in there, nurses, doctors, are doing everything that they can to make sure that the health service stands up and looks after the patients that it needs to do. And it's getting more and more difficult day in, day out. And we only saw how many doctors commented the other week, 100 and odd was it, commented that more money, more investment into the health service is absolutely necessary. And all that the Prime Minister and the Health Secretary says, well, I'm sorry when people are dying in trolleys, in ambulances, when a nurse the other day spent her whole shift looking after patients in the back of an ambulance. It's an absolute disgrace. And what really is a disgrace, some of us have been pointing it out for the last 10 years of where we are. Now, I think, and I use the health service since I had my cancer, I go quite regularly for tests. And the service I get at Salford Royal is second to none, first class. But by God, it's difficult. Last time I was in, for when I had my stoma correction, on nights there was a nurse and what I call, I don't know what they call it now, an auxiliary. That's all on the ward. And the buzzer was going all night long from patients that needed attention and unable to get it. It's an absolute disgrace what's happening now, frightening for people that are going in, wondering whether they're going to have an operation. So overall, Gina Reynolds is absolutely right to point it out, and it's about time the opposition came forward, wrote to their ministers who they support and said, get your finger out, do something about it. This is absolutely crucial to the people of this country. When one thing they all talk about, the health service is one of the greatest institutions we have, and that day in, day out, it's collapsing and falling through the floor. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Karen Guido.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to say one or two things with regards to the City Mayor's statement. Like him, it was horrific to hear about the Pearson family. That was the most awful thing that I'd ever heard. And our officers and the police and the fire brigade who went in when these children were in there must have been absolutely unbelievable. I can't imagine how they felt. It must have been awful. But we all know that the community in that area are excellent, and they've worked very, very hard and tirelessly, I think. And they've raised quite, I think, a lot of money. And the councillors as well in there, I know, have been involved totally with them. And I think credit is to them as well. We always seem in this city, if there's anything that's a problem, we're there. We never stand back and we never, ever not do anything. And I'm very proud of the city that I live in. I lived in Manchester and didn't like it, I have to say. I lived in High Rope-in-Shaw, which was being altered all the time, and it wasn't a very nice place or a friendly place to live. So I'm delighted that I came to live in Salford. My other point is, you went on about children in schools having breakfast. As far as I know, for at least 30 years, children in Salford have been having breakfast. I know a teacher who used to take in the bread, a toaster and some butter to actually give these children something to eat. It's not new, I'm afraid to say, and I think it's quite sad that in 2018 we're still having to do it, because there is cereals on the market that are very cheap and can give a child a breakfast. Sometimes it's because the parents don't have the time to do it, they're off to work, and other times is a bit like me, right? My kids don't want it, and I'm like thinking, well, for goodness sake, will you eat something? But they don't want what we're giving them, and then when they get to school, they like everything that's there. And Kellogg's have also been part of this development within our schools. And I know that it's still going on now, because when I was the ceremonial mayor, I went to quite a lot of breakfasts. And I quite like the father breakfast, where it's dads that go and not mums that go on that particular day and have breakfast with the children. So I quite enjoyed that, and I think it's something. I'm very sad, as I say, as a mum and a grandma, that in 2018 we're still having to do it. But I was pleased, Mr. City Mayor, to hear the good news about Salford. I thought all we were going to have was knock the government, which is your job to do, and I accept that, and I'll sit here and I'll take it, and at sometimes you and I will have a discussion about it. But I'd like to say that I am proud of what's happening within Salford. I like the Quays. The Quays is lovely. It's well talked about. We went away last week and people knew about Salford Quays, which is incredible for me, because, you know, at one time, I think everybody used to say, oh, well, I live in Manchester, I don't live in Salford, right? And now everybody's proud to say that they live in Salford. And that is due to the council, and it is due to the way that we have all worked together. And I don't want that to go. I want us to carry on working together. And there will be times when we can't support what you're doing, but in most times our hearts are there that we want the best for the citizens of Salford. We're not nimbies and saying not in our backyard. We do want the best for the people in Salford. So I have to say, thank you very much for the positive news. We will have a discussion about the negative news. Perhaps we should have a meeting, you and I. Because when I was the city mayor, when I was the ceremonial mayor, we had a few conflicts, but I think we worked very well together. So thank you very much for the report that you've given, and I hope in 2018 it's a lot better for us.
Thank you. Councillor Ansabus.
Thank you, Chair. The Councillor Robin Garrido talked about the luxury apartments that have been built in the city, and there are some that have been built. He talked about the solution to the imbalance between the luxury apartments in the city and the need for affordable housing was in the hands of the council, because we'd given permission to these apartments. And the implication of that is that we as a city council, as a planning authority, should have refused permission for some of those developments in the city. And of course, that is just a rather tawdry sham from Councillor Garrido, intended to deflect from the real arguments that are involved. I don't think that Councillor Robin Garrido could actually put forward one single argument why the planning panel should have turned down these applications. He cannot show that they conflicted with either local or national planning policy, and he knows full well that if the City Council had turned down those applications, then we would have deemed to be unreasonable. They would have been overturned by government inspectors, and the City Council would have been effectively fined by having to bear costs for making unreasonable decisions. I think that the decisions of the planning panel are always reasonable. They always take account of national and local planning policy. That is not the issue. There was a time when the planning panel received applications from the housing department of the City Council, and we built lots of social housing. There was a time when the planning panel used to receive lots of applications from housing associations funded by the Housing Corporation, and we provided affordable housing. The issue is not whether particular physical buildings comply with planning policies on design and so forth. The real issue is the nature of the applications that are coming before us. And in this country, we have retreated from the idea that the public sector should provide affordable housing for the people of the city. It's all been done by private developers looking at the market. So it's no surprise when the public sector withdraws from the provision of housing that we get an imbalance, that it's purely determined by the market. And I have to say that our own policies requiring developers to provide a proportion of affordable housing are undermined by the national planning policies. Section 49, I think, of the National Planning Policy Framework, which gives them the opt-out if then developments are deemed unviable. It's not a question of this authority giving the wrong permissions. We're not getting the right applications, and that's because we have had governments of both parties, I have to say, which have not privileged the public provision of housing. So really, what Councillor Robin Garrido is arguing for is more public provision, perhaps the nationalisation of some developers in order to bring forward the right applications.
Thank you. As we're already running late, we should have I believe we should have the interval now for 10 minutes, and the City Mayor will reply on our return. Thank you. Seated.
Councillor Wilson, can I tell him about the staying behind to practice the voting?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I wonder whether you'd be kind enough, please, to stay behind at the end of council just for a few minutes. We'd like to explain the voting buttons. There will be voting at the February council meeting. Councillor Anselbus, don't look so concerned. We will be voting, and these new microphones have got voting buttons. So colleagues from IT would like to explain it to you at the end of the meeting, if you don't mind hanging on.
Let's get the City Mayor to reply, shall we?
Yeah.
There you go. Okay.
The City Mayor will reply. Thank you.
Okay, it was slightly remiss of me. I forgot to mention some further good news, Councillor Greedo, and that is that Councillor Margaret Morris, as you will know, in the New Year's Honours, has actually received an MBE for services to health services. So, I did circulate everyone an email in terms of people who are either working or live in Salford around the recognition that people have had this year in the New Year's Honours, and it's a real testament, I think, to the fantastic work that has been going on in the city for many, many years. So congratulations to everyone, really, who's been nominated and received those awards. Now, getting on to the substantive in terms of the questions that were asked of me in terms of the statement. Start with Councillor Gina Reynolds. Absolutely, totally agree with you. It's an absolute disgrace what's happening within the NHS and the chronic underfunding of our NHS over many years when we compare it to other OECD developed economies. Interestingly as well, I don't know if any of you have seen the news this morning, but the headline article in the BBC is that 33,000 nurses are leaving the NHS every single year. 1 in 10 nurses are leaving our NHS every single year. That is an absolute disgrace and an absolute tragedy. And that is a real litmus test and proxy as to what's going on within that organisation in terms of the staff being overworked and the poor workforce planning over many, many years. What I would say is it's not just about our NHS, it's also about the broader healthcare system. And you'll all be familiar with the council's budget. Since 2010, we've lost 186 million in Salford from our revenue budget, and we've got a further 12 million to find this year. That is having profound implications for social care and the provision of care within this city. That inevitably has a relationship with our hospitals and the broader care system, as well as the work that the CCG within Salford commission. So let's make no mistake about it. This is a crisis. It's a crisis of a colossal scale, and it's not just about our hospitals, it's about health and the broader social care system. I mean, we're also familiar with what's been happening in Salford recently around actual residential care and the real challenges that are actually happening within our city as that has historically been privatised. Now, moving on to, I guess, saying thank you to the workforce across the CCG, the NHS and social care. I have been working with Councillor Reynolds and also Councillor Sharp to send a letter of thank you to all our health and social care staff working across the social care system and health system in what are really, really difficult winter times. So we will do that, and we'll make sure we send our thanks to all members of staff. Now, moving on to the issue that Councillor Robin Garrido raises around nationalisation and not wanting to go back to the past and this whole idea of public ownership. You know, I'm often reminded that certainly when we privatised the utilities, it's really interesting what happened there. We undervalued the asset base, then people actually bought shares in those companies. Those individuals who had that insider information became millionaires overnight. Now, you're not telling me that privatisation is a model for delivering effective services and effective infrastructure. Absolute nonsense. A lot of this comes down to effective contractual management. I accept that. And the role of the state and local government have a place to play, in my opinion, in terms of that. But let's not forget, to actually client manage those contractual relationships is resource intensive. It requires resources for us to employ members of staff with the right skills, with the right experience, to ensure we get as much out of those contracts, those private contracts, as we possibly can. Government are committed to austerity, they're committed to the shrinking of the state, they're committed to local government cuts. Inevitably, as a consequence of that, what we've been losing over recent years is the skills and the expertise within the state to ensure we can drive through efficiencies in terms of contract management. There are huge challenges nationally with regards to how we manage contracts across the country, both centrally and locally within local government. I agree the NHS is an issue, and I think you've conceded that. Yes, the government have put money in, but they've also not actually thought about the future. And actually, when you look at the money they're putting, quite often they're taking money out of the system and then putting it back in. It's not actually new money. There's a lot of gimmickry going on here. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors going on here. So when you say we're putting in more money, you know, we're not putting in enough, quite clearly. And as we know, we have an aging population within the United Kingdom. We should have been thinking about these issues many, many years ago and not just simply responding to crisis now. And it clearly isn't enough money. You know, we've heard the anecdotes shared from Councillor Hines in terms of people waiting in corridors on hospital beds or ambulance beds, or people waiting in ambulances and being treated in ambulances. This is not the sign of a dignified and civilised society. This is an absolute disgrace. Then moving on to the issue around luxury apartments, and Councillor Antrobus, I think, did a reasonable job of actually answering that question for me. So thank you, Councillor Antrobus. However, I will go one step further. You know, the chronic undersupply of council housing and social housing is an issue of housing policy. Housing policy is very much driven by the Department of Government. And even now, at this point in time, when you've got the Prime Minister making these grandiose announcements about putting billions into social housing providers and local authorities potentially building houses again, we're still no further forward on that issue. I met with the executive of the HCA within the North West region only the other day, and I asked the question, what's happening with the additional money that the Prime Minister is putting into social housing and council housing? They didn't even know. They did not even know. This is an issue of housing policy. This is an issue around how the government actually organises itself. And it's also an issue for what Councillor Antrobus highlighted in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework, which we know protects developer profits before issues of Section 106 contributions or before issues of affordable housing are actually considered. It's a whole system issue, and the government have the opportunity to actually resolve this. However, what I'm seeing is very little action, very little demonstrative action to resolve these issues. Look at what they're doing on Right to Buy. They're further incentivising the selling off of our council houses up and down this country. Over recent years in Greater Manchester, we've been losing 10 council houses and it's been replaced by one. Quite often not at a council rent, a social rent, but at an affordable rent. They're pushing rents up through their housing policies and their strategies, and they're not giving local authorities the resources to build council housing. We have a cap on our housing revenue account in this local authority, which prohibits us from actually borrowing to build council housing. So it's an absolute nonsense to say that we're responsible for what's going on in terms of house building. It is solely driven by the private sector, and the Tory government are in hock with the private sector, and they're happy with the private sector delivering housing, by and large totally unaffordable throughout this country. So it's an absolute nonsense to lay blame at the planning authority of Salford City Council for what is fundamentally a systemic national housing crisis. In terms of the other point around universal credit, now I don't know what involvement Councillor Greedo has had with the anti-poverty work that Councillor Boschel has been leading, but the data and the statistics I've seen are being corroborated. And I don't know what you're seeing, Councillor Greedo, But I don't for one moment believe that if the government have just rowed back on their universal credit arrangements by 1 week, so people now have to wait 5 weeks rather than 6 weeks before they can actually receive payment under universal credit. I don't understand quite how that's going to deal with the issue of arrears that they've already built up, you know, over probably several years since the impacts of welfare reform. So I'm not sure what it is you think the government's rowing back on universal credit is going to achieve. But, you know, all we're doing here is pushing people into more and more debt. These individuals are running up arrears on their rent, they're probably running up arrears on council tax, and what the DWP now are saying to them is you have to wait 5 weeks to claim universal credit, and what we'll do is we'll put you into more debt, because we'll give you a loan for those 5 weeks that you actually have no money to make ends meet. Quite how personal and household debt and increasing that is going to solve this problem, I really do not know. But I'll go one step further. What we'll do is we'll actually share the work, the excellent work that Councillor Boschall has been doing through the anti-poverty work with all members of this council, so you can see for yourself the detailed analysis we've been doing on universal credit and the impact it's having on the residents of this city. It is an absolute disgrace. There is more work to be done as well to hold the DWP to account for this policy and how it's being implemented in practice. Councillor Hines, I agree with you. I agree with Councillor Gredo's position on public ownership. Public ownership, as we all know, applies by and large to larger organisations, and I think you highlighted that. It's not about the hairdresser or the chippy down the road. It is actually about some of those bigger organisations. And when we look to places like Germany and France, it's really interesting that they often have state-owned corporations delivering some of these things. So, you know, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to this debate between public and private ownership, it's about effectively run organisations that are acting in the public good and not for short-term private profitability. We have a massive problem in this country with that agenda. Thank you very much as well also for sharing your anecdotes on the NHS. I think that's really useful to inform the debate, and it is an absolute disgrace that patients are waiting in corridors and treated in the back of ambulances. In terms of Councillor Karen Garrido's point, it was horrific to hear about the Pearson family, and what I said I absolutely meant. And you know, I regularly, day in, day out, I'm thinking about how that must be playing out in that community and also with that family. And obviously anything I can do and this council can do, I'm sure we will. And I know Councillor Stone is doing a lot of work really in children's services to make sure we have a coordinated response to how we work with that family and that community moving forward. And I'd just like to thank, you know, the councillors and the officers who've been involved. And I'm aware Councillor Bellamy has also been doing excellent work in the community. So thank you. And, you know, the welfare of the people is the highest law. We all know that. And our communities in the city of Salford are absolutely phenomenal, and we should celebrate them. In terms of children's having breakfast in schools, I think this is where we'll probably slightly differ. And, you know, I will put on record my thanks and appreciation to the work that Kellogg's are doing. And as you know, Kellogg's have decided to choose Salford to actually base their UK headquarters, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's a great feat for the city in terms of access to jobs and opportunities. But for me, you know, children shouldn't have to have breakfast in schools at the end of the day, especially in the 21st century in one of the most developed economies in the Western world. That isn't to say that, you know, if children want to or choose to have breakfast in schools, then they shouldn't be given that option. I think there's two different issues here. The issue I have is we do have families in this city who are struggling to make ends meet and who are going out to do 2 and 3 jobs in the city just to put food on the table. And that then does result in, unfortunately, children arriving at school without having had a breakfast. And that is shameful. Councillor Boschall as well is also doing quite a lot of work on food poverty, and one of the things I did say was maybe what we need to do is shed a bit of a spotlight working with Tom Tocker at the CAB to actually better understand what's happening throughout the city in terms of food poverty. But let's make no doubt about it, food poverty is on the rise in this city. It seems to impact children, which is an absolute disgrace, and it also impacts people in and out of work, and we need to do something about it. Media City Salford Quays is an absolute fantastic achievement. And you know, when we reflect on that this council was absolutely lambasted for acquiring the land back in the day. You know, I think it was the front page of the Manchester Evening News. And actually today, I think we can all stand here saying it's served the city well. There's still more work to do in terms of improving access to jobs and opportunities and apprenticeships. But over the next 10 years, we all know in this chamber that Salford Quays, Media City UK, is going to double in size, creating more opportunities for the city of Salford. The challenge we have, as I said in my speech, is how we link people with those opportunities. There's lots of other good stuff happening in the city, and unfortunately, because I'm limited for time in terms of a 15-minute speech, I couldn't talk about it. But the restoration of Cutacre, the new country park that's been created there, fantastic green asset in the city, serving that part of our city. Peel Park, the restoration of one of the first public parks, going to be opened in summer. I was down there the other day. Absolutely amazing what we've achieved there. Only in a couple of weeks' time, I think it's actually next week, I think, we're opening the second flood basin. Fantastic. Working with the Environment Agency, again, creating a green asset in the heart of what is, by and large, an urban environment. We also won a national award for all the work we were doing on the Bridgewater canals in terms of improving those disused railway lines, transforming them into walking and cycling infrastructure. There's also the work in Earlham and Cadishead to restore the wetlands. You know, peat is a natural carbon sink. It helps us with our climate change agenda. All of these are fantastic achievements that are taking place day in, day out within the city of Salford. And it's a credit to each and every one of you who makes those things happen. Officers, members, and partners across the city region. So we should be rightly proud of our great achievements, but the realist in me always strives for a balance. And yes, I'm happy to talk about the good things, but my focus will always be on trying to deal with the bad things so we can turn them into good things. I won't comment on Councillor Antrobus's comments because I think I dealt with it with regards to responding to Councillor Greedo's question, but I wholly agree with everything you say. Private developers have a monopoly on housing in this country. That desperately needs to change. Section 49 of the National Planning Policy Framework needs to change, and we have an opportunity this year because I understand the government are going to be consulting on the National Planning Policy Framework in 2018. That is an opportunity for our Tory colleagues to also participate in that consultation and highlight the ills of the government's policy and legislation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. The statement of Councillor John Merry, Deputy City Mayor, and Cladding.
When I was asked this council to authorise the expenditure of £25 million as a loan to ensure that we actually got the cladding work away, I also gave a promise, which I hope that some of you at least might remember, that I would report back on the results of that and report back to this council. But I was very conscious of the enormous responsibility being placed in myself and the team of officers to ensure the best deal that we could obtain for the city and to maximise the safety of the residents. And on a day when we've had a little bit of a disagreement across the chamber about various things, I think one of the most positive things that came out of it was the unanimous support we got for the policies that we were carrying on both sides of the chamber to do the right thing by the residents. So I've got 4 issues that I want to report to you back on. The first one is something that I did promise way back, that Councillor Longshaw, before his tragic demise, asked us to look at the issue of whether or not he had been somehow indirectly responsible for what had happened, and it was one of the reasons why he decided that he didn't want to be involved. I've been working with Miranda, and we're hopefully in a position soon to give details of the report that's been compiled. But there's a further point which I want to add to that, which is that the Salford Star, and I don't often refer to the Salford Star in this particular chamber, made a request for all the emails relating to the Lake Council Longshore's relationship with Peatole and the exchange of emails between them. Understandably, we had to comb through an awful lot of emails. First of all, we wanted to make sure there was nothing of any personal nature that was being released. But secondly, we wanted to be clear on which ones needed to be released. And we did that to the Salford Star, despite them complaining about the length of time it took. What did they find to complain about in combing through those emails? The only thing that they could find to complain about was the fact that Peatole had decided not to talk to them. As though we had somehow told Peatole that they hadn't got to talk to them. It was an email from Peatole that we did not in fact reply to, but it was an email relating to the fact that they had decided not to speak to the Salford Star. I think it would have been, it's remiss of the Salford Star, and I'm disappointed in this case, to at least make the point that following their inquiry, that was the only thing that they could find that was at all they were able to complain about, actually, and they should have made that more clearer in the statements they made at the time. Now, the three major issues that I wanted to deal with is about the safety of the residents, about minimising the nuisance and inconvenience to those residents, and about what we're doing now in terms of safeguarding public money. Those are the three priorities which I've sought to organise the work along the lines of. And throughout this period, I think the local ward councillors will testify we've kept them fully informed. We've published regular newsletters to go out to tenants. We've also had regular meetings with the scrutiny committee to inform them of the progress that's being made. So I don't think anybody can complain that the people who are directly involved have not been kept informed of the progress of the discussions that have been taken. Now, I'm acutely aware of the fact that we needed to come up with a solution that actually met the needs of the residents. There's no point in putting cladding back on in a very hurried manner that in 3 or 4 years' time we suddenly have to take off again because there's a further scare about its safety or otherwise, or that it doesn't meet the needs of the residents. We have taken a little bit of time, and I regret that, but I think it was absolutely right to come up with the solution, following extensive testing, that will meet the needs of the residents. And shortly before Christmas, I was able to make it public that we are coming up with a solution. We've reached agreement with Peatole, and a design work is underway. And following that, there will be a start in March. I'm fairly confident to actually put the stuff on the actual tower blocks. Now, people are saying, well, why is it taking so long? Well, we've got to get the design right. If we actually fudge this, or don't get it right, or don't do the required tests, then we would be failing in our responsibility to residents that would be even more inconvenienced and put at risk as a result of doing so. So I think it's right to make sure that we have the right solution and that we are putting it in place. The second thing is that we introduce measures following on with discussions with the City Mayor, first of all to make the cladding that existed on the building safe, and secondly, we also introduce a system of safety within the tower blocks, a system of fire marshals, a system of making sure that the safety of the residents were put at the top. I think that they can be satisfied that we have put the interests of their safety at the actual top of the list. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, ward councillors from Langworthy, but broadly speaking, most of the residents feel that that has actually been addressed. We've also been carrying out work, some of which should have been carried out in advance, quite frankly, by the contractors, but we've been carrying out work, commissioning work, to make sure that the fire safety doors and the like are safe within the blocks and are doing the job for which they've been designed. And again, I think that was the right approach to take. So at the top of the list all the time has been the safety of residents in these particular blocks. The second issue, which again has to be addressed in terms of cladding issues and in terms of what work has to be done within the blocks, is about minimising inconvenience and disruption to residents. One of the strengths of the cladding system that was on there was about insulating the blocks so that electricity bills and the like were actually cut as a result. We have to be satisfied that whatever we put in place does not lead to substantial further expense for the residents, and that's one of the reasons why we're working to design the system appropriately, and we will continue to do that. And of course, we do know that certain works will have to be carried out inside the blocks, but again, it will be carried out in a way that we try and minimise inconvenience to residents. I can't promise that there won't be inconvenience to the residents because of the first principle I talked about, the safety of the residents. The safety of the residents has to take priority. And I'm sure residents would rather a little bit of temporary inconvenience than their safety be compromised. The third issue, which I'm pleased about, is about safeguarding public money, because that money we've got is as a loan to the council, and if we can recover the money, we need to do so. And this has been an issue, and I apologise for the length of time it's taken, but it was really important to get this right. We have been in complex discussions and negotiations with PTOL, the original contractors, as far as we were concerned, to ensure that that is safeguarded. I'm very pleased to tell you all in this council chamber that the heads of term have agreed a long-term loan to PTOL which will be repaid over a period of time to ensure that the interests of the council are safeguarded. And I think that that's a considerable achievement, actually. And it's something that we need to make sure that both the safety work is being done, but that the money is also safeguarded as well, and that we will get that money back and that interest will be paid. Now, there's been a lot of loose talk about legal action and all the rest of it. At the end of the day, no one has actually compromised their legal rights, and I have to tell the council, nobody's compromised their legal rights yet, but the fact remains that we thought that it was rather more important, rather than let this go to court now, which will take 3 or 4 years to resolve, that we actually agreed to put that to one side for the moment, get on with the work and sort out the legal liabilities at a later stage. And in that context, we will be working with people to see... Sorry? Can I have an extension of time, please, Chair? Right, I think it's rather important I do inform the council the full details of this, actually, if that's okay with the council. Right, it's rather important that we get to a situation where we work with PTOL. If there's money that they can recover from other people, we will be supportive in terms of that action. So just to summarise, and I apologise that there are constraints of time on me, happy to take questions. Right, first of all, I've sent you documentation relating to the other 2 bodies in Salford, the other 2 public sector bodies, and the details of what they're doing. But this principle is principally about our money and about what we're doing to protect the interests of the residents that are under our direct control. So just to summarise, right, I think that this is a matter that local government can be proud of, actually, and central government, if I'm honest, should be quite ashamed. Some of you might remember that Theresa May, at the time of Grenfell, promised there will be resources available for anybody who's got safety problems. They shouldn't stint from doing the work required because we will make sure that there are resources available. There are no resources available from central government. Instead, we've had this rather sort of disappointing approach of trying to wriggle out of any sort of liability, saying, oh, this cladding should never have been put up because of the building regulations, or you're the landlord, it's your responsibility. You know, and I'm pretty sure that the Grenfell Tower inquiry, as the building regulations inquiry is already done, will identify failings on behalf of central government that need to deal with that. But secondly, I think we can be proud of, we put the interests of residents first. We put the safety of those residents first. And when we were challenged to do something about it, we stood up to the mark. And I can say to this council, I believe we are still in the process of delivering, but we've got a long way towards solving the problem and towards meeting our responsibilities and at the same time meeting other people's responsibilities as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Councillor Warmshire.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I just would want it put on record my thanks and my fellow ward councillors' thanks to Councillor Merry, the Mayor and the team that have been involved in this, because it has not been an easy situation. You know, what happened at Grenfell was an absolute tragedy. But I think that we as a council, and I include all the council, have been very supportive and looked to finding a solution. It has taken a long time, but as Councillor Merry said, we had to get it right. There's no point in just panicking and just throwing another load of cladding on that isn't fit for purpose. You know, and I also have to thank the residents on the Broadwalk and on the other tower blocks within Langworthy. They have been absolutely superb. During the recent by-election, we knocked on nearly every door on the tower blocks, and we had a couple of people, quite rightly, they were really upset, but I think that was through fear. But the vast majority were just so supportive of what the council had done. I think the way that the Housing Association down there, Pendleton Together, and the staff at Pendleton Together have been first class. The information that's gone out, keeping people informed, has been second to none. And I hope that that will continue. We know we've got a long way to go and that there is going to be disruption in that area, and I hope that the tenants will stick with us, but we will do our best, because first and foremost, as Councillor Merry said, your safety is our priority. And so I do thank Councillor Merry for making this statement today, and I hope that something will go out to residents in the near future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. This report was for noting. Item 12, general question of comments to Cabinet members on the discharge of responsibilities within their portfolios. We read no written questions, and therefore I'm going to go through each one, and if there are any questions. Councillor Paula Bushell, Statutory Deputy.
Councillor Turner.
Sorry, Councillor Turner.
Councillor Robin Garrido.
There have been reports recently in the media regarding the stadium and Sale Sharks, and some of the reports say an ultimatum was given to this council. They're threatening to move by the sounds of it. I wondered if you could make a comment on that. And the other item, again, is in that vicinity. I also understand that Salford Reds Rugby Club had changes at the top. And I was wondering if you could tell the council how this may or may not affect the historic debt owed by the Salford Red Lions, as Red Devils they call themselves now, the Salford Red Devils, how this might affect the council's arrangement, because as you know, there was an arrangement made prompted by the rugby authorities with the, I presume you can call him the previous owner, and I'm just wondering if this new setup is going to affect us, or what steps are we likely to take to try and recover, or is it not possible? Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Bushell, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. On those two questions, Councillor Turner, first, the stadium, the ultimatum by Sale Sharks. I think we have confirmed previously that there has been an offer from Sale Sharks. I know we've met you individually, I think, in the past and discussed that as well with you. It was an offer that we could not accept, and there's been nothing else forthcoming since that time. On the second point around the rugby club and the CVA, I'm presuming, the CVA actually follows the club, not the owner. So that remains as it is. As a board, we have met with Sale Sharks, with the new rugby club, and the new rugby club. And our mayoral team will be meeting shortly with Salford Reds as well. But no, the CVA actually follows the club, not the owner.
Thank you. Councillor Robin Greedo.
Okay. Sorry, sir. Yeah, just coming back, as the City Mayor did actually mention, Councillor Bushell, in his responses regarding universal credit, I really just wanted to make a couple of points. Before I do so, perhaps I should also declare an interest, as I am actually a member of the Forviva Group Board, which is in fact properly recorded in the Register of Members' Interests. So if I could just carry on. Can I say, in fact, that as far as the 6-week waiting period is concerned, I too share the concern, I think of probably every member of this council, that it was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. Right? I just really want to make that point very, very clear. I'm glad that we are at least moving in the right direction, and that in fact that has now been reduced and will help the situation. I hope in fact that the arrangements that are being put in place to help with those arrears which have happened because of that situation will actually help to reduce them at a reasonable length of time. And I think just to finalise, in fact, the point that I was making earlier was not that the arrears were acceptable, but that in fact it may not have given a completely accurate picture, and that the reasons for those arrears were not because people hadn't paid because they didn't want to pay. It was purely a temporary issue which was now being rectified.
Okay, thank you very much for those comments. Universal credit, both sides of MPs actually asked for it to be halted. They asked for it to be halted while the faults were sorted out, because we know the hurt it's causing in our communities. Instead of that, it's actually been tinkered around the edges, and no, it really isn't good enough. Going from 6 weeks to 5 weeks, that's 1 week, and the additional support that people were offered was the loan that they can have during that period will be extended payback time from 6 to 12 months. Well, again, that really is not good enough. When people are facing the reforms that they're facing with benefit caps as well, it just is a really dreadful situation that people are facing in the communities. So 6 months to 12 months is really not good enough. People are left during that time with not enough food. Some that we've come across have had £20 to keep them for the whole month, sorry. So the additional thing with universal credit is I will get a briefing note out. The City Mayor's quite right. We've done an awful lot of work around data in Salford. In fact, the LGA have invited us to provide evidence to their Northwest investigation on universal credit, and we're about to do that. I'll get a briefing out. On the 31st of January, there is a twilight session for all members, so we can update you on all the work we're doing. And the City Mayor's also asked in the March Council that we provide a feedback 1 year on from the work that we're doing to mitigate the impact, not just of universal credit, but the whole of welfare reform.
No further questions. Councillor John Murray, gone back a few years, about 30. Councillor Bill Hines. Councillor Tracy Kelly. Councillor David Lancaster. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. There is, I think, a Chinese curse to say, may you live in interesting times. And I think in relation to plastic, we're beginning to live in interesting times because there was an announcement recently by the Chinese government that they're going to cease the importation of plastic from the UK and I think other nations as well. That, of course, was going to have an impact on us. And I would ask Councillor Lancaster, please, to comment on this. Now, Councillor Lancaster has sent out a very helpful briefing to us, but I would imagine you may well have a further update. But in addition to that, we also heard very, very recently, only a couple of days ago, I think, where the EU Commission made an announcement on making all plastic reusable by 2030, which is much better, I think, than the promise, the sort of promise made by the Prime Minister, who's looking at 2042. Now, many, many years ago, I did put a motion before this council, which was supported by most of us here, about reducing plastic bag use. I'm glad now that at long last, people in powerful position are beginning to listen and take action. So I'd like, if I may, Councillor Lancaster, to ask you to give us an update on how things, in particular, about the Chinese issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Derek Anspers.
Can we ask Councillor Lancaster to reply to that?
Oh.
So I thought he was replying for me, that was all.
I could never do that. My reply would only be reasonable, not perfect.
Can I make it clear that the recycling report I actually sent to you, including the issue about plastic, was quite an important document I hope people read. And I did emphasise in that document that at Greater Manchester Waste, we don't use China, or haven't used China for some time now for plastic. So no plans to continue to use it. We do, however, use China for paper and cardboard. At the moment, there is no curtailment on that going to China. But it's understandable in certain respects with Chinese governments, because I can understand why they don't want the plastic, because they've got their recycling rates themselves are not that good of their own material. So they should be sorting out their own material for recycling before necessarily importing our recycled material. But there is a serious issue which I think we've got to recognise. The effect on China, in my concern, is, and I've already raised this at Greater Manchester Waste, is going to be on the price or the willingness of people to take our products. Because already we've seen evidence that the price is dropping for our products for recycling. And partially we are to blame for that. When I say we, I mean all councils and not just Salford. Because in my opinion, our procurement isn't been good enough. We should be insisting contractors use recycled material in all their products. It's something we used to do as a council some years ago. We used to have a statement on every contract which was let. We said, what are you doing with your about recycling, and give evidence about what actually tonnage you've reused. We don't do that as far as I'm aware anymore. So the one way we're actually going to create a market for recycled products is we actually start monitoring when we let in contracts, what firms are doing about recycling and are they using recycling material. Because that in itself could do more good than, because at the moment what we could find ourselves in is we increased rate of recycling, which is now 48% in Salford, could even suffer because we haven't got the market for that recycled product, and it could finish up in incineration. That's something we don't want, but we've got to ensure there is a market for that, and we can create that market, because I think that's important. I also think one of the other important issues which we've got to do is do something about packaging. I know that's not plastic, and I welcome what the government has done, I welcome what Europe has said, but is it good enough? Is it good enough to talk about that longer period of time? Quickly we brought in the plastic bag scenario, which has been very successful. Why can't we actually do something about packaging faster than what we said? I would think we should be saying to our Salford firms and Salford stores, and we'd follow the lead of Iceland, but Iceland said 5 years no plastic material. But in actual fact, I think 5 years is too long. There should be a move to actually encourage people not to use plastic and to also encourage them to recycle as well. I went to well, I won't quote where the area it was, but yeah, there was a shop on Liverpool Road yesterday, And the amount of cardboard which was getting thrown in general waste was just unbelievable. You know, to me, that should never happen. It's criminal to just put into general waste cardboard material. It should be actually recycled and recycled products. But the series of help, which I think we've got to do, and I'm going to be pressing at Greater Manchester Waste, that we do something about recycling and packaging, which is quite important. Encourage Greater Manchester to take a lead to actually ensure that we bring forward some of the timescales which are being proposed at the moment on recycling. And also that in the case of plastic, we take example. We had a long discussion at a meeting recently when we were talking about plastic cups we use at the Civic Centre. Well, plastic cups is only a small fraction of the plastic material, and the cost of, somebody was saying, well, you can separate the plastic from the paper on the plastic cup. Well, you can, but there is a cost there. Well, is it not just simpler to say, well, we'll only use plastic cups which can be recycled rather than cups which can't have to have something done to them before we can? So there's a number of measures we can do, but I think it's an issue we've got to take very seriously, and I'll be bringing a report after Greater Manchester Waste tomorrow about what we can do and what we ought to be doing at Greater Manchester level.
Thank you. Councillor Derek Antrobus. Councillor Bolker.
What's he been doing?
Councillor Bolkind.
I have given Councillor Antrobus previous information on this. Again, it's to do with the meetings that have been arranged by the Swinton Open Spaces Community Association. In fact, I've been lucky to attend those meetings because a member of the Swinton South Labour Party told the chairman that I shouldn't attend these meetings anymore because I'm no longer going to be the councillor for Salford and therefore I can't help Swinton South. So I would hope that he would take that back and look into it, because I think it's disgusting, and I will serve this Swinton South Council until I finish in May. The question I'm going to ask is a question that has been put from or following a statement that was made by a fellow councillor, in that they feel, again, you have had discussions with Bellway Homes regarding the sewage works, and that the statement then went on to say that if the plans don't get approved, 1,000 homes will be built on that site and the adjoining site. And knowing you as you are, Councillor Antrobus, I doubt very much whether the statements are in fact true, and I'd just like that confirmation.
Councillor Guido.
I'm afraid Councillor Antrobus and I'm afraid also the City Mayor are not a bit selective in what they actually say. And Councillor Antrobus and the City Mayor refer to MPPF 49 in relation to house building and the restrictions it places on Salford. And in fact, all 49 says is housing applications should be considered in the context of the presumption in favour of sustainable development. But if you read on to paragraph 50, which is what I would actually refer to, and which I believe gives Salford the power to set better plans, and I'll read it to you, it's quite short, to deliver a wide choice of high-quality homes, widen opportunities for home ownership, and create sustainable, inclusive and mixed local planning authorities should plan for a mix of housing based on current and future demographic trends, market trends and the needs of different groups in the community, such as, but not limited to, families with children, older people, people with disabilities, service families and people wishing to build their own homes. To identify the size, type, tenure and range of housing this is required in particular locations reflecting local demands, and where they have identified that affordable housing is needed, set policies for meeting this need on site, unless off-site provision or a financial contribution or broadly equivalent value can be robustly justified. For example, to improve or make more effective use of existing housing stock. And the need to approach contributes to the objective of creating mixed and balanced communities. Such policies should be sufficiently flexible to take account of changing market conditions over time. And I believe that that puts the ball firmly in Salford's court when planning what housing need there is and the type of housing we need in Salford.
Councillor Garrido. Sorry, Councillor Collinson, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. There's 2 points. I'm not quite sure whether I've got the right lead member for this, actually, but one of my questions was former Councillor Gina Merritt was very involved with the Empty Homes project, and I'm just wondering where we're up to with that, whether we're making any progress with that. The second question on a sort of more kind of personal level, but I'm interested really. There's a very beautiful building on Chapel Street, which used to be the Salford Education Offices, which has been boarded up for many years. And I'm just wondering what the plans for that are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we ask Councillor Antrobus to reply now?
Councillor Antrobus to reply.
I'm not going to read out bits of the National Planning Policy Framework in response to Councillor Garrido, but it's very clear that the test of viability applies, and that is what I was referring to. If I got the section of the NPPF wrong, then I apologise. But we do have policies which say what the level of affordable housing should be on site. And the point that I was making is undermined by the National Planning Policy Framework policy on viability, which puts developer profits before the needs of local communities. That's the problem, and until Councillor Garrido acknowledges that, and instead of defending his party, defends the communities that are being decimated by the government policy, unless he defends his communities, then quite frankly, no one need pay any attention to the windy rhetoric of Councillor Garrido. As to Councillor Collinson, I think you've probably got the wrong lead member on both counts. And I think Councillor Kelly deals with the empty housing in her portfolio, but I do know that Salford is performing better than any authority on bringing empty homes back into use, and I'm sure that those statistics can be provided. And indeed, we are also top of the league in Greater Manchester on the provision of affordable housing through our planning policies, in spite of having to constantly combat this evil policy of the government. As for the education officers, I suspect that that's more of a regeneration issue. My understanding is that the education offices are now owned by the Diocese of Salford, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Salford, and that their long-term aspiration is to use the premises as retirement flats for priests. I think I suspect, although off the top of my head I don't know, I suspect that the building is listed, and so that beautiful facade would be protected in any event. But as ever, when we're dealing with organisations which are not cash-rich organisations and can't borrow lots of money. Sometimes it does take them some time to deliver their aspirations, and we've all seen the fantastic work that the diocese have done around Chapel Street in some of the facilities that they've provided, and I'm sure that it will eventually come forward. As to Councillor Balkind, first of all, I think Councillor Balkind has a responsibility which I'm sure he will undertake as long as he is a representative of the Swinton South Ward to carry out those duties appropriately, and nothing should stand in the way of that. As to meetings with the developers, I'm delighted to say that the developers for the Swinton Sewage Works site have complied with the City Council's policy, which requires them to carry out pre-application discussions with the planning authority. So before they've even put together an application, they should discuss things with the planning authority, and where it's such a major application, I would expect the developers to come to me and tell me what their proposals were, and they did that. It was purely a briefing meeting in the presence of officers. There was no discussion about the merits of the proposal. It was simply informing me of a major application that was coming forward. I'm more delighted that they actually engaged with the local community before putting an application in, said these are our thoughts, and wanted to listen to what the local community had to say. And I have to say that United Utilities, who own the land, and I'm going back years now, so my memory is a bit hazy, but United Utilities, representatives, myself, planning officers and representatives of SOSCA met together at the very start in people's homes to talk about what the aspirations should be for that site. So there's been full engagement between the planning authority, the local community, the landowners, and the developers throughout, and that is best practice, and I make no apologies for that. Oh, sorry, the question about the 1,000 homes. I don't know where that figure has come from. What I have always said is that because that site is used to be a brownfield site, now technically it's a greenfield site, but it has no planning policy which prevents development of the site. It's not a green belt, it's not a local nature reserve or anything like that. It has no policy which protects the site, which means that a developer could come forward, as United Utilities did many years ago, for the full development of the site. I don't know whether that's 1,000 homes or whether it's 700 or whether it's 500. I've certainly not mentioned any figure. But what I've pointed out is that the fallback position for the landowners may be to bring forward an application for the full development of the site. At the moment, our negotiations with them have been about saying that enabling development might be acceptable to the planning panel, that is, only development which funds the benefit. And that is the demand that SOSCA, the Swinton Open Spaces Society, made at the start of their process.
Thank you. Councillor Lisa Stone.
Councillor Birch.
Councillor Birch.
Thank you, Chairman. Salford is the second fastest developing area in the country after London. Of course, creating tremendous opportunities for local people, or it should. And of course, a lot of development is taking place in Ordsall. In order for the local young people, need people, not in employment, education and training, to connect with those opportunities, a project called Build Ordsall has been set up, And some might say, can anything good come out of Nazareth or Odsal? Indeed, it can. And it did. The project was so successful that it was rolled out across the whole city of Salford, again providing opportunities for neat young people, 16 to 21, to get into construction jobs and industry. Well, Build Odsal was such a tremendous community undertaking that it's worthwhile praising the effort. Odsal Community Cafe was providing free lunches for our neat young people. Even a local developer provided portaloos for the site. Local from Media City graphic designer for free created media materials for us. And Salford College was providing trainers. As I said before, because the project was, is it a surprise that the whole community came together and the project became such a success? Now it's rolled out across the city and it has had its first run. Again, it was successful. Build Salford doesn't just do things, it gets things done, and there is a difference. There are great outcomes for our young people, and some of them from Odsal who didn't have probably the best reputation, were well known to the local residents, but not for the right things. They signed up, 3 of them signed up to the project, and in fact enjoyed the whole project, and also one of them became a success story, and he's still working, I believe, with Forest. So my question is to the lead member for Children's Services, could you please help me to celebrate the great work that Salford City Council with partners are doing, making the most of the development that's taking place in the city, and also could you please tell us a little bit more about that? Thank you.
Thank you. Solicitor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm grateful for the question. I think although the amount of young people in the city who are not in education, employment or training is just under the national average, it is still higher than we would like it to be. It is one of our key priorities, and I'm pleased to say that despite having to cut our skills and work budget, services and commissions in recent years due to the scale of government cuts that have been imposed on us since 2010, there is still a lot of work that's going on across the city and with our partners to help get young people into education, employment and training. Salford Futures is an employability programme which is coordinated and funded by the council. And since 2013, it's provided a successful bespoke traineeship pathway to help young people who are not in education, employment or training to develop the skills and core competencies that they need to access suitable employment opportunities and apprenticeships. In fact, tomorrow morning I'm going to be presenting certificates to some young people who have been involved in something called My Traineeship, which is a council-funded programme delivered by Myscough College and Salford Futures, where the young people have been involved in a 16-week programme, which gives them valuable work experience with a professional reference. They've gained an employability skills award, they've improved their English, maths and IT skills, and gained vocational knowledge and qualifications. And I'm pleased to say that already 3 of those young people have actually gotten apprenticeships and jobs, and others have even got interviews this week. In July last year, the Learning and Work Institute published a report which highlighted Salford's traineeship programme as a model of best practice. And in December, we issued our traineeship development funds to help encourage other providers in the city to create better quality traineeship programmes, and actually to fund expenses and allowances for trainees. Build Salford is the first scheme that's funded through that, with around 20 young people who will benefit from construction-based traineeships when the programme starts in April. And as Councillor Birch referred to, it does build on the legacy of the Pendleton Together and Build Orsal traineeships that have been successful in recent years. That is just a small snapshot of the work that's going on across the city with a number of partners. As a council, as well as delivering our employability and skills strategy, promoting the City Mayor's Employment Standards Charter, we're also developing our Learning City work, And that brings together a whole host of different and exciting programmes, projects and opportunities that we're working on, and I look forward to bringing more information on that in the near future. I think it's important that we do celebrate that despite the current climate, we really do prioritise young people in Salford, and we do still have services available to help them gain employment, education and training. And I would certainly like to note my thanks to all those dedicated people who work for the council, but also for a range of organisations across the city who are passionate and committed to helping our children and young people and to creating opportunities to support them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gina Reynolds.
Councillor Fletcher, Councillor Turner, Councillor Buchan, Councillor Fletcher was first. Yeah.
Councillor Fletcher.
Chair. The question I would like to ask Councillor Gina Reynolds concerns a nursing home in this Swinton area, and it's Swinton Hall Nursing Home. Unfortunately, we've been informed recently that it's about to close. And the question I'd like to know is, are the concerns of people being addressed, and what other arrangements are being made for the current residents of that home? Thank you.
Right, thanks Councillor Fletcher. Appreciate this is a very difficult time for everybody involved in this. And I'm obviously disappointed with the owners that have made that decision to close this care home. They haven't, just for clarification, they haven't asked the council for any help or assistance to remain open. And as an independent business, there is fragility within the market nationally, and private businesses can make the decision to enter and exit the market as they wish. So I just would like to make that point. Obviously, for me as lead member, it's paramount that the care and support needs of these residents and obviously the needs of the family and relatives are met, and that we meet our requirements as a council under the Care Act. So that is of real importance to us, and that is our #1 priority. I have sent 2 stakeholder briefing notes out to residents via Paul Walsher, who is our Head of Integrated Commissioning, so all councillors have received those. And those were sent out as soon as I had information about this closure. I was notified, the City Mayor was notified, and all councillors were informed of what was going on. But just to recap, residents were contacted the day after we'd been given notification with a letter. All residents and relatives have had a meeting with the homeowners where they've had the opportunity to discuss all their concerns and anxieties around this. Residents have all been allocated a key worker, which is either a CCG nurse or a social worker, who are making contact with them on a daily basis. And the relatives are also getting support from these workers. Assessments have taken place to identify everybody's needs, and the process has begun to actually reaccommodate and find appropriate placements for all these residents. There was originally 36 vulnerable people in this home. There is now 22 remaining, and I think they've worked incredibly hard, the staff, to manage to find appropriate placements in such a short space of time for those individuals. So we've still got 22 that obviously we're concerned about. The Adult Safeguarding Review team are going in daily, as are the funded nursing team, and they have got real skills and expertise in these areas. And so I'm very confident that we've got a very experienced team working on this. There's also a review meeting on a weekly basis. That's with senior CCG officers, senior officers in adult social care from the council, and obviously from the integrated care organisation based at Salford Royal. So that is going on, and I am briefed after that review meeting on a regular basis. We have got 4 poorly residents in that home, and they are being monitored very closely by the End of Life team. And obviously it will be very considered what happens to those residents. The home will not close before everybody's needs have been met. There will be continuity of care, so that home will not close while there's still residents remaining in there. And obviously the CQC are heavily involved in this, and they are meeting weekly with the home because there have been issues around medicines management, which was picked up when that was inspected last year, and which is why the home requires improvement, and it is still at that status. There is also a pharmacist who is going in there on a daily basis to check the safety of the medicines management and that appropriate practice is taking place in that home. So I hope that does give members here reassurance that as much as possible is being done under very difficult circumstances.
Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Chair. God, I wish people would read emails when they're sent them. Sorry about that. Councillor, congratulations, Gina, on your promotion to this position you're in, and congratulations to the new Langworthy councillor. I hope he enjoys it as much as we will do. There's been much talk about the NHS, as there always is at this time of the year, and we've had people waiting in corridors, etc., etc. And the government say one thing and the opposition not say something opposite, and it's a job to know who's telling the truth. We have Salford Royal Hospital, which I think we all hold in the highest esteem. It's one of the best in the country. And I think myself as an adult, well, I think I'm an adult, would like to know how they're performing in these difficult circumstances. Now, I don't intend to ask you all the stats because I don't think that would be fair on you. But I think at some stage it would be helpful if we did know how they're doing. But I was trying to look to see who our representative was on the board of this important body, and I noticed that it was unfortunately the late Councillor Longshaw. So what I'm going to ask you today is you can comment on what I've said, but when are you going to appoint someone to replace? Because it is an important board, and I'm sure that members may well have questions on the Salford Royal Hospital and how they're coping. I know it's a bit parochial, but that's the way I am. It's Salford I'm concerned with, and I'm concerned with the people, how I'm sure they're probably performing better than most, but it would be nice to know. Okay then, thank you.
Right, thank you, Les, and thank you for your congratulations. Just first on the board, yeah, you're quite right. It was Councillor Longshaw on the governing body at Salford Royal, and we are looking at a member to replace Councillor Longshaw on that board. The reason that hasn't happened quickly is that you do have to have quite a lot of time commitment to be on that board. There are subcommittees that you're expected to be on. So obviously we want somebody who's able to give the dedication and commitment to being on that board and to do the work well. So we are on with that and looking into somebody who will be a suitable replacement. We have an urgent care delivery board who are specifically looking at all the winter pressures and all the issues that we have got at Salford Royal at the moment. Our delayed transfers of care at the moment have improved. At one time we did have a lot of people bed blocking in Salford Royal, but that position has improved. Obviously they're still working under extremely difficult conditions, but we are managing as best we can the winter pressures. I think it probably would be best if I do get a briefing paper out to members with a bit more information about that, but it is being carefully managed at the moment. and I'm quite reassured that it is the travel of direction is in the right direction, that a lot of issues that we had last year are being managed well. As I say, there's regular meetings with the board. We have put in place GP streaming, which I'm not sure people are aware of, where when people come into A&E, they're triaged now by a GP to see whether they can be just signposted to a GP practice, whether they can be treated by another service within the hospital, and they don't have to go through into an A&E care facility within there. Or, you know, so people are being directed to the most appropriate service, and that is working pretty well, this GP streaming. So that's something that's been introduced over the last few months. But I think it would probably be better if I give a bit more detail as a brief out to all members. Okay,
Thank you. It's now 12:30, which is our allotted time, unless somebody wishes to move, and we accept another 10 minutes. Right, it's been moved and seconded 10 minutes. All those in favour say aye. Anybody against? The ayes have it.
Councillor Kunziza wants to ask a question.
Bolkin first, isn't it?
Councillor Bolkind.
Yeah, I've just heard Councillor Turner moan about me possibly. I'm trying to make up for lost time and possibly time I'm going to lose in the future. I'd just like at this stage, first of all, to thank the City Mayor. He's well aware that I've not been well recently, and he has shown the compassion and commitment that a leader of any council should show, and he's regularly stayed in contact with me. I just want to give a particular example of what happened. On New Year's Day, I particularly didn't feel very well, so I phoned my own surgery, not knowing what to do. They referred me to 101. You then phoned 101, and I was waiting for about 30 minutes. Not 101, 111, sorry. And I had to wait for about 30 minutes. He came on the phone, and he asked a load of questions. It is a question, it's leading to a question. Okay. And I'm just saying about the NHS, and I'm allowed to make comment. What basically happened is they went through a load of questions and said, we can't send a doctor to you because we haven't got enough on duty. And it'll take probably 6 or 7 hours. From what you're telling us, we're going to have to get a paramedic to come and see me. So a paramedic came. He then said he doesn't like the way I am. I've got to go to accident emergency at Salford Royal. I arrived at Salford Royal at 2:10, having already had 2 hours of not feeling well. The ambulance people then stood in the corridor for about another hour, waiting for a nurse to come and take me along. It then took 3.5 hours for a doctor to see me, because I need special antibiotics. Here's the question. Okay. It then took I needed special antibiotics. Can you please confirm that the staff at Salford Royal are working under exceptional circumstances and circumstances beyond what they should be doing, and that we should be imposing upon the government to ensure that the staff at Salford Royal are properly staffed? Because when you speak to them, they love the job, but they actually hate the job because of the pressure that they're put under. And by the way, I only went home at 3:30 in the morning.
Right, thank you, Howard. I mean, I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience and you weren't treated, you know, in a shorter time than you were. Yeah, the staff are under immense pressure, which I've said earlier, which Councillor Hines has indicated, which the City Mayor has indicated. And obviously there are still concerns, but the staff are working as best they can with what resources they've got. And this is why we have to continue to lobby hard as a council to central government to make sure that the NHS is properly funded, that we have sufficient staff in there, because as the City Mayor has said, we are hemorrhaging staff nationally, that nurses, because of the stress of the work, are leaving the profession, and as are some other healthcare professionals, and this is the situation we're in. As I say, Councillor Sharp and myself are working with the City Mayor to thank all the staff at Salford Royal and throughout the whole health and social care system within Salford for the work that they are doing. So we will just continue to lobby to make sure that these resources, issues are addressed. As you know, we have a shortage of GPs. That is a national issue. We are working hard to recruit GPs into Salford, and that work will continue.
Thank you. Could members be brief? Because the way things are going, we're not even going to finish the agenda. Councillor Carranza.
Mine is not really a question. I've received a warm welcome in this house, and may I allow just to say a few words of thanks for allowing me to feel welcome. And I also want to thank everyone who have been involved in what we've been doing, the team in Langworthy, and I'm looking forward to work together as a team. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next move on to general questions and comments.
Miss John Ferguson.
Oh, sorry. Councillor John Ferguson. Well, we usually miss you out, John, anyway. Councillor John Ferguson.
No questions.
No questions. General questions and comments to chairs of scrutiny panels. And as I said before, please keep it short.
Just go through them one at a time.
Councillor David Jolly. Adrian Bucklehurst, Councillor John Mullen, Councillor Margaret Morris, Stephen Ord.
No, keep going.
Items scheduled reports from board. Just for noting, I declare the meeting closed at 12:37. Yeah.
If you'd like to hang on for those people who would like to know how to vote, and we'll show you how the buttons work.